Trump is finally back on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and nobody was expecting that. Last time when he was a guest on the show, he simply walked out due to tough questions about his family. Now, however, Trump comes well prepared to defend his position. All in all, the next sequence will turn the show on its head as Jimmy begins his introduction by saying, "Mr. President, I think it's time to show something." In order to explain the reasons of such a surprising move, it is necessary to recall previous events. Trump, a sitting U.S. president in 2025, is once again returning to Jimmy Kimmel Live after their last meeting, which was particularly interesting because it ended in an unusual way. Specifically, Trump got mad about tough questions Jimmy had asked him about his family. These headlines were widely discussed, and most people did not know whether Trump would ever return to this show again. However, today, it seems like he decided to give this attempt another try. Thus, Trump, who always enjoyed controlling people's opinions about him, likely had some goals in mind when agreeing to attend another interview at Jimmy Kimmel Live. Perhaps, he aimed to reconcile with Jimmy and to explain his position about family matters. Another possibility is that Trump decided to share some details without receiving any interruptions or objections. Whatever the case may be, this event attracted a lot of attention beforehand. The audience was excited to see Trump once again, but still had many questions. Would the next meeting bring the same amount of conflict, or would it become a turning point? The moment Trump enters the show, everybody can sense that something is changing. On the one hand, it looks like he came with some specific purpose. On the other hand, there is a lot of uncertainty since no one knows how things will develop. In fact, the very atmosphere becomes quite unusual since everybody can see the difference between this interview and the last one. For instance, the audience is whispering an expectation. The studio crew adjusts cameras and lights, but everyone can sense that the air of tension hangs in the air. When Trump enters the show, people are looking at him attentively. He greets the host with a handshake and acknowledges the audience with a wave. But this casual behavior hides some unusual things. Namely, it looks like Trump is prepared for the worst as he tries to show that he is not afraid of anything. The audience knows that Jimmy never allows any guest to control conversations, so Trump decided to get ready for this challenge. Overall, one may describe Trump's behavior and appearance as confident but unpredictable at the same time. In fact, he sits down in a slightly tilted manner, which means that he knows the purpose of tonight's conversation. In other words, this sitting style shows that Trump is ready to fight his way through. Once Trump settles down, the interview starts. At first, Jimmy asks some casual questions, so that people in the audience can relax. The two men talk about different topics related to current events. The show's participants exchange jokes, which causes laughter from time to time, but overall, one may say that everybody feels the tension. It looks like both the host and the guest understand the meaning of tonight's meeting. Trump has to prove some points, and Jimmy wants to uncover many secrets about him. Thus, the conversation between these two is similar to the one between chess players. The game can start unexpectedly, so that everyone is looking for an opponent's weak point. At first, the conversation between these two moves smoothly. Trump answers Jimmy's questions with confidence and ease. Nevertheless, as he remembers the past events, it is possible to observe changes in his body language. More specifically, Trump begins to talk very rapidly, providing explanations without any hesitation. Moreover, people in the audience begin to pay attention to the fact that Trump talks loudly. Everybody knows that it may happen due to certain reasons. Namely, Trump feels that he has to prove something important today. The audience listens in silence to Trump's monologues with occasional laughs that mask uncertainty rather than amusement. Trump, however, continues telling the audience everything in detail. It is possible to say that he is speaking for the sake of proving something. He explains the details of his marriage and family life with the help of numerous stories. The more he talks, the harder it gets to understand his point. In fact, some of the details seem unnecessary, but Trump is obviously determined to show everyone that his family is normal despite some rumors. As for the audience, it feels the tension, but still pays attention to Trump's speech. The first questions Jimmy asks are about Barron, Ivanka, and Melania. At first, Trump listens carefully to the host's words, but it does not last long as he interrupts Jimmy in the middle of a conversation. He speaks about Melania's role in the family and how she gives birth to children. Furthermore, he talks about Barron being Melania's child and explains the events of the last 5 years in his life. It seems like Trump wants to give the audience a brief insight into the lives of him and his family members. However, the audience's reaction is slightly different from what Trump expected. At first, people are impressed by Trump's detailed explanations of different things, but further information makes the audience feel uncertain. Trump speaks so fast that people are unable to grasp the main idea of his explanations and remember all the details. In addition, people in the audience become confused by the fact that Trump constantly insists on providing extra facts about their lives. He mentions rumors about Ivanka, about whom people often speak negatively. Moreover, he discusses his frustration with the media's treatment of his family, providing examples of media coverage. He says that each point should be analyzed carefully because people tend to believe rumors. However, if anyone investigates these rumors, it is possible to see the truth clearly, according to Trump. In general, one may say that Trump's explanations lead to more questions because people feel the lack of clarity and logic. In particular, reporters who watch the video later note that Trump's constant repetitions and insistence on providing detailed explanations actually create doubts in the audience. Overall, his explanations do not achieve the desired results, although Trump believes that he has convinced everyone of something. Moreover, his behavior also undergoes significant changes as he starts speaking. At first, Trump is very relaxed and even a bit cheerful, as Jimmy greets him with some jokes. However, now, Trump speaks with a different tone of voice. He is serious and insistent. One may notice that as the interview progresses, his energy is gradually changing. Specifically, Trump becomes more determined and even defensive, as he speaks about his family in great detail. He gestures as he speaks, constantly repeating the same things in order to make them easier to remember. But by giving Trump such an amount of time for speaking, Jimmy also was preparing himself for a turning point in the interview. Listening to further explanations, it becomes clear that the determination of Trump to prove himself is becoming over-explaining. From the detailed explanation of Melania's pregnancy, to Barron's upbringing and Ivanka's public appearances, everything seems to be an example of normally of the president. However, the abundance of information leads to quite an interesting effect. By trying to convince people in something, Trump actually creates a condition of confusion and inability of following what the speaker says. The atmosphere in the room changes as soon as the first 30 minutes of the interview pass. Trump tries to use over-explaining as a tool of self-defense and clarification of the issue. But while doing this, the president creates a certain intrigue and raises a question as to why he needs to repeat the thing so many times. It creates a certain intrigue in listeners' minds that make them curious about the president's future actions. It also makes them uncertain. They are not sure if he actually wants to be believed, or if he is just trying to show his innocence in order to avoid punishment. All the stories told by Trump seem to carry both a note of transparency and defensive tone. Trump tries to show that he is innocent and does not lie to his audience, but the excessive number of anecdotes and claims makes it harder to understand. It seems that Trump tries to defend himself with every sentence he says. While telling all those stories, Trump shows a certain amount of intensity in his eyes, as well as enthusiasm that his words do not have the ability to convey. This part of the interview becomes a good example of how over-explaining can affect people's perception and create further intrigue. At the end of the first part of the interview, there comes a moment of truth. After spending hours and hours explaining everything and justifying himself, Trump finally faces something unexpected. But before that happens, he spends some more time justifying his decisions and actions. His statements seem to indicate that he is not afraid of anything, that nothing can be used against him, and that he knows what he is doing. All this lasts until Jimmy Kimmel asks him a special question. It sounds quite calmly, almost unnoticeably, until it turns out that the president has nothing to say after it. Jimmy starts talking to the president calmly. He looks quite relaxed and composed, but all that time, there was something he wanted to do. Finally, the moment comes. In the middle of their conversation, Jimmy leans forward slightly and asks the president a question that turns his words into a whole new level of seriousness. It goes as follows. Mr. President, I think it's time to show something. Everyone stops breathing in the room, listening attentively to what the presenter of the show has to say. It takes a few long seconds of total silence. Nobody knows what is going to happen next. Jimmy reaches under the table, takes some papers from there, and says calmly that he will present to everyone Barron's real parentage. The title alone makes the audience inhale with interest. The fact is, the topic that people had been talking about for months now gets a confirmation that was necessary to prove it. Moreover, Jimmy explains that he has verified the information very carefully using a number of sources. Now, people understand that everything said earlier by the president cannot be true, since Jimmy's information is confirmed. The papers look quite believable when they appear in the hands of Jimmy and everybody sees them clearly on TV screens. Trump's behavior becomes quite nervous and tense. His words sound fast, he looks confused and seems to lose his coolness for a second. Jimmy continues calmly talking about Barron's parents and showing the evidence that proves that the president has been lying to people from the beginning. The president is forced to watch what his opponent is saying. Trump looks angry and disappointed. He feels that now the situation is getting out of control and that it is impossible to manage the process. Jimmy uses the calm strategy that makes Trump feel helpless. Trump's reaction is quite interesting. First, Jimmy asks him to read the papers if he believes in the information that he provides and if the people should see it. But instead of reading the papers, the president tries to continue explaining his position. The president becomes aggressive and talks in quite a nervous manner, as if he was trying to change the situation somehow. People in the room become attentive, listening carefully to the arguments provided by Trump. But nobody laughs or shouts. People are interested in what Trump says, and the reason for that is quite obvious. This is a completely serious moment. Trump becomes increasingly angry as he tries to find some justification for his behavior. It is noticeable how he becomes nervous in the course of his speech. Everyone realizes how the president loses his coolness and tries to control the situation by saying something. But it does not work now. The audience watches with attention, knowing how hard it must be for the president to accept the fact that people found a paper confirming the existence of his lies. So the president remains confident and composed. He is a great orator, but this time he feels that the information cannot be changed. The people become extremely attentive. Their faces show deep concentration and attention. Everybody in the room understands that it is a crucial moment, and everybody is waiting for the reaction of the president. It seems that nobody is interested in jokes anymore. This time, it is important to understand what the president says and to listen attentively. It is a unique experience that allows the people to see the situation from inside. There is some time gap after Jimmy presents the papers to the president. Trump sits in his chair in silence for several seconds as if trying to comprehend something. It becomes apparent that Jimmy did not make any mistake in choosing this moment to reveal his secrets. It was an excellent decision made by the master of his craft, the person who knows how to control the process better than anybody else. Trump seems to be taken aback and shocked by what happened. For several seconds, he looks astonished, unable to say anything to defend himself. It seems that all the arguments he used before failed miserably, and now he is unable to explain what happened. The audience understands that there must be something wrong. Jimmy uses quite an effective strategy, and it helps him to create an appropriate situation in the room. Trump becomes angry after receiving the papers. He raises his voice and shouts at Jimmy, calling him dishonest and lying. All his words sound very agitated and irritated. Trump accuses Jimmy of deception and says that his opponents arranged all this show. Jimmy presents to the people the papers confirming the truth, and the president is unable to deal with the fact. He says to the people that those documents are false and that Jimmy set him up. He tries to prove that he did not say anything against people, that he did not lie to the nation, and that he still considers all accusations to be groundless. Trump continues to shout, trying to convince the people in the things that Jimmy said. This time around, the people felt the change coming, regardless of whether they believed the rumors about Trump's lack of composure beforehand. In this situation, Jimmy's calmness and professionalism got under the president's skin, causing him to start getting frustrated, aggressive, and defensive, like he usually does during confrontations. His actions became familiar in one respect. He raised his voice, stepped towards Jimmy, and tried to make the energy stronger through constant gestures, believing this approach worked in the past. It was, however, unlike him, and the people could understand why. Trump's energy no longer helped him, and he needed something more. Instead of cheers, laughter, or people taking sides, he was facing complete silence. He could hear the people watching attentively as the president was starting to lose his composure. The tension increased, and Jimmy's calm attitude only added to it since Trump kept raising his voice in hope of regaining control. However, it was pointless. Once the person knows about the receipt and can see the evidence with his own eyes, nothing Trump says will make a difference anymore. The moment had turned into a struggle of energy and emotions. Each second Trump spent repeating his statements, explaining the facts, and using his authoritative voice made him angrier and frustrated until the situation was ready to explode. Finally, Trump, now shouting in the middle of a debate, pointed at Jimmy Kimmel and made another effort of repeating his previous points in a more forceful manner. However, Trump could not win this confrontation. He had to step aside and admit defeat. In an attempt to regain his composure, the president pointed at Jimmy with all of his remaining aggression and simply walked out of the studio. It should be admitted that this exit took place in silence and left no space for interpretation. Trump, unable to explain or convince people of anything, decided to leave the room, letting everyone watch how a person who was supposed to look calm and confident started losing control in front of them all. The reaction to such a drastic exit was immediate. Jimmy kept sitting in his chair and staring at the exit for several seconds, allowing people to feel the atmosphere. Nobody was laughing. On the contrary, there was silence inside the studio, and people felt the need to say something in response to this unexpected event. However, nobody did. People remained silent for some time, and then slowly started reacting to this situation. At first, it looked like the people understood that Jimmy was winning. There was a certain feeling of tension in the air, but it was now associated with the realization that the man who was supposed to use authority to convince everybody was defeated. Instead of finishing what he was saying and proving his point, Trump left the room, leaving the audience with an impression of a powerful man who could no longer keep his cool in the face of undeniable facts. In the aftermath of the discussion, it was easy to see how well Trump failed. He had no success whatsoever. The person did not like explanations and repetitions, and even his charm did not work. It was obvious that Trump tried using aggression, explanation, deflection, and repetition, but none of these things helped him since people now knew about the receipt and could prove his mistakes in arguments. This particular interview showed how much Trump struggled to keep his usual behavior pattern in a situation where it was impossible to use any form of manipulation. The man tried using charm and over-explaining but got no results, and then decided to walk away. It could be said that this exit gave everyone in the audience an additional perspective on the way Trump behaved. He lost his temper and left without completing what he was supposed to do. He could not keep calm and convince people of something anymore because they were seeing too many facts and too much evidence in front of them. The exit left an impression of an arrogant man who tried using authority and confidence but failed miserably. People outside the studio reacted to Trump's unexpected decision in silence, discussing the fact that the man had problems admitting defeat in any situation. The atmosphere inside the studio became tense and quiet, and nobody was sure how to react since everything happened so fast. However, people soon realized that this moment was not supposed to be forgotten since Trump acted completely differently. He showed the human side of himself, becoming vulnerable in a situation that was expected to go differently. It was interesting to observe the way people reacted and started understanding something else. Confidence could not replace preparation, energy could not replace patience, and aggression could not replace honesty. In other words, people learned how important it was to know about facts and present them in an intelligent way in a discussion. In the aftermath of this interview, it was obvious that the way Trump behaved was predictable. The man kept showing how determined he was and tried using authority to dominate the situation, trying explaining and repeating his points. However, the evidence provided in the form of receipts and information destroyed all these attempts at manipulation, revealing that the president needed something else apart from his aggression, charm, and authority. As a result, he simply decided to exit, leaving the audience with a strong impression and making it possible to analyze this situation in more detail. When Trump left the studio, the audience remained silent for several minutes, wondering about what they have just experienced. At first, people were not sure whether Jimmy Kimmel had lost control and wanted to leave. Then they realized that Trump did so voluntarily and left without completing anything, realizing that he could not convince anyone. However, Jimmy Kimmel's next words proved that Trump had been the one leaving the studio. The host leaned slightly forward and quietly said, "People deserve honesty, even if it makes you uncomfortable." Those words made it possible to see a new side of the man who tried dominating situations and using manipulations. In fact, the words that he chose to use now showed that he was ready to give up a little bit of his arrogance and try something new. Moreover, those words left a huge impression on the audience members, who started discussing Trump's actions immediately after the show. In fact, people outside the studio started talking about the president and Jimmy's ability to handle him. They were surprised that the latter managed to control the situation and let it evolve in the direction that Trump could no longer control. People were shocked to witness how confidence could sometimes destroy the person instead of making him/her strong. In the aftermath of this discussion, people clearly understood the dynamics that were developing during Trump's stay in the studio. Trump tried to convince people by explaining things, using repetition, and being aggressive but got no result. In contrast, the man whose authority could be compared to that of the president managed to use patience and explanation of the facts to prove a point. Trump's inability to do something similar caused him to leave the room, which meant he lost the fight, although it could be called a rare case since the president always tries winning discussions and debates. After the interview finished, the atmosphere in the studio remained the same as before. People started reflecting on the things they had heard from Trump. The exit made everyone feel as if they had witnessed something amazing. People started analyzing what happened in the studio and why Trump suddenly decided to leave without completing what he started to do. Jimmy's attitude towards the situation was very surprising. In contrast to Trump, the host did nothing to interrupt the conversation or make a joke. He remained professional and calm despite the president's efforts and did not want to get involved in something that could not end peacefully. People now understood that Trump was unable to control the situation since he tried doing so in a wrong way, relying only on confidence and aggression but ignoring the facts. Later, analysts discussed the dynamics of the confrontation between Trump and Jimmy Kimmel, finding a number of interesting things about human behavior and communication. The experts stated that this case perfectly showed what people tended to do when faced with challenges that required them to use intelligence and patience instead of aggressiveness. In other words, it showed the dynamics and the results they produced. Trump did not use preparations and relied only on his aggression. On the contrary, Jimmy used all of his skills and strategies to prove a point without making any mistakes. It could be claimed that this interview revealed the advantages of such an approach. Trump left the room in a hurry, unable to answer Jimmy's questions, while the latter managed to create a new perspective on what people tend to do during discussions and confrontations. However, it should be noted that many people in Trump's entourage saw things in a different light. Some stressed that the president was quite determined and did not back down from discussions. Nevertheless, some admitted that Trump's exit left a lot of room for interpretations and allowed forming some new opinion on the matter. In the end, the people in the studio were able to witness a rare case of Trump acting like a normal person and losing control over his actions. It seems like the exit created a new perspective for many Trump supporters. Jimmy managed to prove that he could easily compete with the president since he prepared properly and used all of his skills, while Trump was trying to control the situation in a wrong way, relying only on his confidence and authority. However, Trump did not get any results due to the presence of receipts and pieces of evidence that the people saw with their own eyes. In general, this experience made everyone reflect on some issues that are important to consider when discussing human behavior.